Today we have the gospel for year A, even though we're in year B, and that's because we have our catechumens from the RCIA with us, those who are seeking to be baptized, confirmed, and receive the Eucharist for the first time in the church. And so the gospel today is appropriate for our catechumens, but it's also appropriate for all of us. And it gives us three opportunities to maybe go a little deeper. So first we have mud pies, we have washing, and then defending our faith. So mud pies, if you see little boys on a rainy day, you know they're going to play in the mud. That's just what little boys do. And God has a little boy's heart because God also loves to play in the mud. In fact, if you go all the way back to the book of Genesis, you'll see that the very first thing God does in creation is he plays in mud. Not only does he play in mud, but because there is this little stream coming up, this little spring in the Garden of Eden, God takes the clay of the earth that's mixed with this water and he forms it into a human being. And that's important for us because Jesus repeats that action in the gospel today. He takes clay and uses his own saliva, his own substance into that clay in order to recreate this blind man. And that's significant for us as well because, as you remember, God took 6 days to create the world. He rested on the seventh day. Now keep in mind, this is from a biblical perspective, not a scientific story. And so God rested on the seventh day. And Jesus rose from the dead early in the morning on the first day of the week, the 8th day, the day of recreation. That's why our baptismal font has 8 sides to it, because it speaks of the resurrection. Baptism is about death and resurrection. We go down into the waters of baptism so that we come up again and live with Christ. We live the life of Christ in the world. And so on Easter Sunday, we're going to prepare ourselves again because all of us will have the opportunity to renew our baptismal promises. That's one of the central features of our Easter liturgy, is where we again stand up in public and say, I reject sin and I profess faith in Christ Jesus. That's powerful. That is powerful stuff. And that's why Jesus, after recreating this man who was born blind, sends him to wash. It's supposed to remind us of those waters of baptism. And all of us, when we were washed in the waters of baptism, were invited to make a profession of faith. Now, obviously, many of us were so small, someone made the profession of faith for us. But at a certain point in life, we're supposed to claim that faith as our own. We're supposed to be able to grow deeper in our faith. And that's really what's happening in today's gospel. This is a journey story. This blind man is on a journey of faith. He starts out completely blind from birth. And then he encounters Christ, who opens up his vision first physically and then spiritually. And you'll see the progression through this gospel if you go back through it again. First, he recognizes that Jesus is a man. Okay, good start. Then he sees him as a prophet. So he recognizes there's something more going on here. And then finally, at the end of the gospel, he worships him as Lord. So this man born blind comes to sight and he comes to faith. Now, if that were only the story, that would be a pretty good story. But we also see in this gospel what happens to a man of faith. He's challenged. He's challenged by cynics. He's challenged by doubters. He's challenged by authorities because faith is not an easy journey. And so we also are invited to ask that question. How am I willing to defend my faith? Not to get in an argument, but to really be prepared, to be open to explain my faith to others who maybe are not at that place in their lives. That is all of our task. All of us are called to be missionaries in the world so that the faith that we profess here doesn't just remain here. This is not just a club that we belong to and we come and celebrate our membership every now and then. This is where we come to be fed and nourished and prepared to go out into the world in order to proclaim the faith that we profess. And that's not always going to be easy. And that's why in our first reading we see God choosing a leader. God chooses a leader that nobody expected. He chooses David, a little shepherd boy. And he chooses him because he's humble and because he knows how to fight. He's humble and trusts in God. He relies on the Lord for his help. But he also knows how to engage against the forces of evil. He knows how to fight against those things that are not part of God's plan. We're invited to see that in our own lives, to see where first we trust in God humbly. We recognize that each day of our lives is not so much about our plans as it is about what God is planning for us. And then we also, like David, need to be courageous, to take on those challenges to our faith that would threaten our faith, to take on those things that are contrary to our faith. And of course, the thing that is most contrary to our faith is sin, our own sin. And that's why coming to sight, physically and spiritually, is important for all of us. We've been journeying with our catechumens during this Lenten season, and we see in them an inspiration. People who are willing to stand up and say, I believe these things, and I'm willing to place myself in public to proclaim that. That should inspire us. That should encourage us also to be willing to profess our faith in the way that we live during the rest of the week. And so the scriptures this weekend invite us to see how that journey of faith has brought us from a blindness to our own sin to a humble recognition of our need also to renew our baptism, to reject sin, and to profess our faith so that we might enter into the world each day willing to proclaim that faith.